All right, I know we had to go through kind of the mid-assassin tier list, and I know a lot of people were like, man, you really could have gone in more depths on some of these assassins, but I'm going to keep it a buck. I did not want to talk about half of those servants because most of them are real bad, but oh boy, now we're on basically my favorite class in the entire game. You guys know I'm a little bit of an ape myself. I like to kind of just run in, punch things really, really hard. If there's a gimmick to a challenge quest, I'm gonna try to figure out how to hit it as hard as possible and get around whatever gimmick that is. And that is why I love me some Berserkers, so I had to go through absolute mid to talk about the most goated class, alright? I love me some Berserkers, and I see that I did not change this from last year, so let me just go ahead and update that real quick. But if you guys do not know, these tier lists, I basically do them at the end of every year, so and some people get this wrong in the comments. They're like, why aren't you talking about this character with this buff? That's because this tier list is looking at the NA version of the game by the end of 2023 and looking at the units that came out, which is why the cutoff is say, and the buffs they had when the year ended, because every year I like to update these tier lists and kind of see what new units have shaken up the meta, new content that's shaken up the meta. I mean, we're going to get 90++ this year that's kind of shaking things up. JP got Ordeal Call and Bleached Earth missions that are kind of shaking things up over there. So content changes things, buffs change things, so I just like to update and go along and see how it changes over on NA, because I don't really, not that I don't care about JP, but I don't care enough to update 2 tier lists, right? I mainly play NA, so I don't care enough to do JP as well. But let's get right into this. So starting right off, normally when we get to some of the earlier servants, they've kind of fallen off. They're not all that, great as of right now, but Hercules over here is aging quite well. Now, I can't quite put him above B tier, and I'm going to tell you why. It's because this guy, despite how good that decent he can be, because his damage, especially at NP1, does leave something to be desired. The issue that I have with him is that while his buffs are very good, they are clearly tailored for you to have his Bond CE, which is great if you have Herc's Bond CE and if you put in the grind to go get that CE, but until you get it, he might feel a little underpowered, because if you don't know, basically his Bond CE gives him 3 different guts, and he gets a buster buff that stacks for every time his buff or his guts procs, right? So every time he loses a life, he gets stronger, right? Combined with a solid attack buff and a dodge buff to give him a little bit more survivability, can crit pretty well. He's also like lowering enemy defense on his own NP. You can start to get some decent damage on, what's kind of a very fine, survival unit. I think he's been power crept a little bit by a lot of other solo units, but still kind of fine. Major thing that kind of annoys me is the fact that you do need the Bond CE, but once you get there, he's pretty good. But he's still very, very solid until you do get somebody like Chi Shi Huang, until you do get someone like Ku Alter, right? You get like a better survival servant. He will be pretty solid. Lancelot, now, I'm trying not to be biased on this one. I am going to mark him up to C+, but you got to remember, I'm considering my gacha units over here at NP1, and I know that my Lancelot is NP5, and I've grailed him a bit because Lancelot is my goat. I love Berserker Lancelot so much. But I got to remember that NP1, his damage is absolute dookie butt cheeks, right? He is not doing any damage. He is slapping people with a wet paper towel, and he can be very, I don't want to say difficult to use as a looper, but he gets the big crit damage buff for 3 turns, but the massive NP gain buff on his 3rd skill only lasts for 1 turn. So ideally, if you do want to use this guy, you want to have something like a maximum broken K-scope. So you basically get that free 1st turn, and he'll refund, an insane amount. He'll refund anywhere from 80 to 100%, right? Because he's getting 100% NP gain. And then finally, that allows both of your Scotties to pretty much just dump the 50 to 100% if you're lucky enough, or you're plug suiting in, say, like Oberon or somebody, for that final node. Because once he loses that NP gain, it's looking a little bit rough for him, because he doesn't have any other NP gain buffs outside of that. He doesn't have any quick buffs. He's just got the attack buff on his NP, and that could be a little bit rough. And outside of farming, the guy basically has no use, right? He can drop a lot of stars on his NP, and he can crit pretty decently, but, no survivability, no gimmicks outside of that. So C+, because he's still a pretty decent looping option, but you do want to get him to higher NP levels, because, otherwise you're not really doing anything with him. Lu Bu over here, I'm going to be a little nice early on and put him in C, because I still think as a newer player, he's a very good option if you just need to nuke a boss. But as you guys saw, I even took him to the Nero Fest challenge quest, fighting against the 13 Lives Herc, which It is still decently, I guess, rough if you're a newer player, but we've kind of far eclipsed stuff like that with break bars and whatnot, and there's really no gimmick outside of him just having a lot of lives. And I was able to get a Lubu clear, but it took a couple of tries with modern supports, with Koyenskayas and Merlins, these really good supports. It was really hard to kind of get him across the finish line. So I don't really see a use for him outside of just being a really big nuke, which he can be good for, if you're early on, you need to just obliterate some bosses. He's a Berserker. You can pretty much bring him to anybody. But outside of that, or like later on in this, I might bump him down to D tier because I just really don't see a use in it using him anymore, especially as we're starting to get stuff like Evocation and say like Jalter becomes a free to play. But that's not the current state of things over here on, NA right now. So I'm trying to keep that in mind. Spartacus, I think, is pretty decent as well, although I think he has a bit more of a use than, say, somebody like Lubu over here, because having a battery on, an AoE Berserker might just be really useful as a newer player even though it doesn't do the craziest damage. If you just need somebody to kind of be like a wave 1 clear, Spartacus might be able to get that done for you, right? He's also, I don't want to say decently tanky because his stats are very, very low, but he has a lot of regen plus the guts, so if you need somebody early on that can kind of stick around, has a little bit of spunk to them, then Spartacus is your guy. But realistically, you're probably just going to use him as an AoE wave clear. And because he's a Berserker, you can pretty much bring him to anything. And he's very useful for stuff like that. Kentoki is aging very, very well. Now, basically, all this guy does is chunk big enemies, right? Like, you're not really bringing him to boss fights. You're predominantly going to be bringing him to, say, like 90 plus nodes or 90 plus nodes in the future, where there might be some large dudes or these like annoying like 313 nodes where you just need somebody that can eviscerate the enemy. The fact that he has very, very high natural damage, still one of the higher damaging single target NPs in the game with no gimmicks, and he's got a 50% battery, and he's a Berserker, meaning you can bring him anywhere. He's just really good for that role. He does that role very, very well. And, it's just making him age very gracefully. If you do want to bring him to more difficult content, it could be a little bit more rough. He does technically stack damage if you want to look at his NP lowering the enemy's buster resistance for 2 turns. That's technically ramping up his damage, but his big attack buff is only 1 turn, and he does have a chance to stun them. So I guess you could try to stun lock the enemy even if you're not doing a whole lot of damage. Maybe you're landing the stuns and, the boss never attacks or something. Because he does have a 50% battery. With Koyenskaya, you can easily loop his NP and everything. But, you're predominantly going to see a lot of use in him when it comes to free quest farming. But, hey, if you want to bring him to a boss fight, I'm not going to stop you. Conversely, someone who is clearly built to be going into boss fights is someone like Vlad. Vlad I kind of see as almost the opposite end of the spectrum for Kentoki over here, where technically you could bring him in the same, 90 plus slot. He just doesn't do nearly as much damage as Kentoki does, so you could do it, but why would you? Instead, Vlad is really good in arts teams at just kind of being a generic-y good guy you can bring to anything. And I mean he's like super generic. I mean, he's got his guts for himself, which none of the other art supports provide, Castoria doesn't give him, Proto Merlin is not going to give it to him, Tamamo doesn't give it to him, so he gives himself unique survivability, also gives himself defense, which they don't give, gives himself a solid attack buff, can mitigate the enemy NP, has a battery himself, just very, very solid in general. He does also have the stackable guts, I believe now we do have that. I think we're waiting for his NP to get buffed the second time. I think we're waiting on one more buff for him, but I'm not sure if that's the exact one. But essentially right now, he's good. He'll get better. But the double guts thing is really funny because I think the second guts only lasts for 1 turn, so you can blow through both of them if you get really unlucky, but very solid. I mean, he even bombs stars on his NP as well, which is very, very nice and appreciated in arts teams. Even though with Proto Merlin, it'll be a little bit easier to maintain stars. If you're bringing double Castoid, it still keeps a nice influx if you want to do some crits. Asterios, I'm just not sure if there's really a use for him anymore, because Asterios was better in the older boss fights when you actually had time to set up the attack and defense debuffs, but I don't think in more current boss fights that you really have that opportunity. It's the same reason that I kind of want to bump Lubu down as well, because I don't really see where you would use either one of them, right? But at least Lubu, you might take out a break bar. You do have a lot of immediate power, especially with his third skill, giving him really big NP damage. With Asterios, the power with him is that you could really start to neuter the enemy's attack and defense so that he could become decently tanking, even as a low rarity Berserker. But you just do not have the time, or it's not really worth the investment to do anymore with current content, which is a little unfortunate because he was one of the unsung heroes of early FGOs that if you didn't have a strong DPS boss killer, you could bring somebody like your Hans, your Mash, and then like your Asterios, stuff along those lines, or like a friend Waver to also help get his NP going and stuff. Caligula, I just don't really see a point to bring in Caligula either. I mean, kind of wants to do the whole Buster crit thing, which, I mean, he's a Berserker. You know, you'd think that'd be really good, but we're waiting for more buffs for this guy. I think they buffed him recently on JP, but I might be thinking of somebody else, or I might be thinking of his most, the recent buff that he got. I'm not entirely sure. You know, forgive me, my Caligula knowledge is probably a little bit foggy. You know, they give him a buff, and I'm probably not paying too much attention to it. But I remember seeing that they were trying to kind of move him in the direction of being, like, I just call them Super Orion servants, where they do a lot of face card damage. And it's not impossible to save him. It's the same thing for like Jekyll and Hyde. I think you could definitely save that unit. I think you could save, I'm forgetting her name. It's the Lancer. You guys know exactly. I don't want to spend too much time trying to remember her name, but same thing for like her and Caligula over here. I think they're definitely salvageable. You just need to start throwing more buffs their way. But unfortunately, they take a long time to kind of get around to doing them. Darius, see, Darius is another one that I don't exactly want to put him in D tier because I think if you need yourself an AoE Berserker that's kind of decent into challenge quests, Darius isn't the worst option. Well, he's definitely one of the worst options, but he's got stuff, you know what I mean? Like, he's got a Guts, he's got a debuff cleanse, you know, he has an NP gain buff to help him with his genning. He's lowering the enemy's buster resistance as well, so you can kind of just start contributing more damage to the entire party. If for some reason you need Kolyan Sky to also do some damage, or Oberon needs to do some damage, you have to use their NPs for some reason. I mean, it's definitely really hard to justify him being up here in C tier, but I see Kiyohime as well. And it's probably the same thing that I look at both of them, and it's really unfortunate because Kiyohime was the first unit I ever bond 10 because I brought her everywhere. But if I understood that, you know, having a scope, and I could have been bringing like Darius, or especially I could have been bringing Spartacus instead, probably would have, but I was like, Kiyohime is adorable, I'm going to bring her. But unfortunately, just doesn't really have a point, where at least Darius, you see some value. Like, he's at least got something going on that you could rock him, whereas the best thing that Kiyohime has realistically is maybe that she burns if you want to use Honey Lake, technically, and then she has the Buster buff, I suppose, but yeah, it's unfortunate because the reason I can't stick him in C tiers or D tiers because someone like Kiyohime, I just don't really see even a remote purpose to use unless you really, really like Kiyohime, right? Which is kind of unfortunate that both of her versions are not super great. So, you know, Laseng will do something about that. Eric Bloodaxe, I remember early on, was one of these servants, kind of like Giles de Ray, that if you had a bunch of super scopes, they had a very quick NP and were good for farming. That's about all I can say about him. Tomcat definitely got better after we started getting the command code. You can use her for looping stuff as well, but I'm not entirely seeing a reason, like, kind of outside of Lancelot to use Tomcat similarly. I mean, especially because someone like Frankenstein, I would think, would be a bit more valuable than them. Now, she also does the stun herself thing, but with Frankenstein, her damage is really crazy for an AoE unit, and I think it's a bit more worth it if you want to try to play around that. As opposed with Tomcat, she's more usable now, but I guess the dichotomy is that she's a bit better, I guess, into more difficult content, because, you know, she has things like the NP drain, she has things like the defensive buff, she has the invul that I believe they buffed on her third skill now, so that stuff kind of helps her out a little bit more, whereas Lancelot is just NP, try to spam as much as possible, bomb a bunch of stars, and then just start critting people into oblivion, because at least his third skill, you know, the crit damage is free, and he can do some pretty good crits. I'll give him his credit on that, but I've used Fran a little bit for quick farming, and the damage is very, very nice. If you want to play around the stun, you know, by all means, go for it, but she definitely is a bit more useful, I would say, than these two. Beowulf's kind of interesting. I think Beowulf doesn't get as much credit as he probably deserves. He's just like a solid, good enough crit servant, but doesn't really do anything outside the norm that it's like, oh, we really got to just hone in on how good this guy is. You know, having like being like anti-dragon, and I believe also I think it's just anti-giant. I don't think it's anti-super giant. I think it's just giant. Having those niches, I think, is very good and very solid, but not enough to really kick him up into like A tier or even like B plus tier. Nightingale is really, really hard to gauge. Just because I do see a point in maybe bringing Nightingale to some team comps, I I could put her in. No, I mean, no, she has some niches. For the niches, because I'm remembering that she gives you insta-kill immunity as well, and her NP can let you face tank NPs. The targetable 50% buster buff is rather solid, right? But I think a lot of people that want to put Nightingale in like a EX tier, right? Those people are a bit delusional. I think they're looking at year one FGO and they're looking at a bygone era with rose tinted glasses and just not accepting the fact that Nightingale is definitely fallen off. But because her NP is really good, because her first and third skills are really good, and they are still useful, especially if you don't have anything better, I'm going to slap her in B tier. Like, she does have a use. I would just really like to see her second skill become targetable, because a support having a power mod for themselves is a bit interesting, but it's kind of not needed. It's a little, I don't want to say worthless, but not very good. If you make that targetable, I definitely think it helps out a little bit more, because that's humanoid, right? Humanoid is really good. That's like all the servants and everything. It would make her a, like, if you don't have Oberon, like a better, not better than Oberon, but a better plug suit option than, say, like someone like Waver, because you would get a bigger card buff and you'd get a power mod, right? Like, stuff like that could be very useful. So she's definitely not beyond saving. She's definitely not the C tier dookie garbage. I think if you're thinking that, I don't think you've ever used Nightingale. She is very useful if you want to try to bring her, but I think a lot of that stuff as a side tangent comes from people that only do like double Castoria, double Scotty, double Koyin, plug suit and Oberon. Like, you just don't try any other team comps. It's a wide game. You know, I encourage people, when challenge quests come out, you know, after you beat it the first time with whatever team comp you have, start exploring out, start using different team comps, explore other servants. I promise you, it'll make the game a lot more fun, because you'll hit a wall where you can't just bring, you know, your double Merlin even in like year one and still be having fun. Unless, you know, that works for you, then pop off. But for me, I get bored. I got to start using other servants. Like, I pulled Zhang Yu on JP recently, and I'm really excited to start using him over there as an aside. But Coup Alter, all right. Coup Alter, I don't want to be a little bit too biased, because Coup Alter is one of my favorite servants, but I think the fact that Coup Alter can basically solo everything up until, I think it's about the Arjuna Alter fight, is where the solos start to become a little bit hard gatekept, but then you could still start using them to solo stuff after that. The fact that you can still pretty much bring him to clap up everything in the game is insane. I mean, one of the advices that I now give to new players, if they're like, oh, should I summon on this stuff immediately? Like, how should I go through and clear things? I just tell them, bring a friend Coup Alter. He's a Berserker. He's very, very easy to use. The fact that his NP is now buffed to do more damage and it removes defensive buffs means that he can't be stopped. The one issue I had with him is that only having the 2 instead of the 3 dodges that normal Coup had did mean that sometimes you could get caught with your pants down. But now he can't even be stalled by like invul or dodge buffs on the enemy, and he's doing more damage. The guy is just really, really good. He's just super insane. I know that solos aren't the thing for everybody, but they can be very useful if your box is not up to snuff. If you don't have a box that has like all the crazy supports, or you don't have the servant that specifically trashes that challenge quest, like Masashi for the Valentine's event. You know, when I was looking through my box, I was like, oh wait, no, Masashi does really, really good into this. She has Pierce Invul for Coup. She has Power Mod against Bazette. She'll do really fine against this. And look at that, trashed her on the first time that we brought her out there. So if you don't have stuff like that, stuff like Coup Alter can be very, very strong. And even though the value of Coup Alter might drop to being closer to an A tier as your box gets better, it's not like you still can't bring him with, say, like double Koyenskaya or like Koyenskaya Merlin to beef up his damage a little bit, something along those lines. You could still get some value out of him as a single target. Okay, Raiko as of right now is not super great, but I need you guys to understand, because I know some people are going to look at this and they'd be like, no, but on JP, she's crazy. And we're talking end of 2023 on the NA version of the game, not on JP. So I need you to get the wax out of your ears. Right now, not super great. I think the best I can do, Chief, is maybe B tier. I think that's the best I can do since she can Star Bomb on her NP. The fact that her crit star drop rate is on the NP and not the third skill, like say someone like a Skandar, does mean that the NP will always function as a Star Bomb, and she's got good power mods, right? You know, Earth, like Sky and Earth and all that good stuff. That's all very, very nice things for her to have. The fact that she does have some survivability, plus can crit pretty decently on her first skill. I do like all of those things. They finally did fix the second skill, which was like a 30% one-turn buster buff, which is unheard of. It is such an unbelievable shaft for Raikou. They fixed that last year on JP, so we're still about a year and a half away from getting that on NA. But once she gets that, she becomes stupid insane. She goes from like maybe being arguably B tier at best to probably being closer to like a C plus unit to being like an AA plus unit. Like, it's surprising what a battery will do for a servant. Plus, who would have thought? We fixed their damage a little bit and now they're all of a sudden a lot better. It does help that she's an AoE Berserker with different power mods as well. With numerous power mods, that definitely does help her out. Ibaraki, there used to be kind of an argument of people that would say that they thought Ibaraki was kind of like, ooh, a different alternative for Herc. I think that's kind of crazy talk. Oh man, see, if I think Ibaraki's like down here, then can Blue Boo even be up here? I don't think so, because I think if you're looking for a more solid single target that's an alternate to Herc if you don't have them, Ibaraki's not bad. She has a solid, you know, damage buff, right? She has like the Oni Charisma. She has solid defense. She does debuff cleanse. But really outside of that, she's doing the basic essentials. She's not really doing anything super crazy outside of that. They did try to give her a cute little lore skill that tied her in with Shootin. And they also threw a couple of other like generic buffs. I believe it was a 20% battery they threw on there, I think, something along those lines. Decent enough, but still, I don't think not enough to really get her out of C tier. You're not really going to be using Ibaraki unless you want to try out a new servant, but she's decent. She can get you through some challenge quests, but you'd probably rather invest in getting Herc's Bond CE, because then you're doing a lot of damage and you have way more survivability as well. MHX Alter. Dude, I really want to slap her up in like A+ EX tier. I'm a huge fan of MHX Alter, but I think that's my own bias. I'm going to put her up here. Even still, the one thing I don't like about MHX Alter is that she doesn't really have any survivability, but her survivability is I will murder the opponent. I'm going to massacre them, right? Like, she steals all the stars for herself. Unfortunately, only has one crit buff on her first skill each. That's a little annoying. I hope they fix that in the future, but then they just buffed her NP and then gave her not only a power mod against Sabers, but also against good alignment people, plus also buffing her NP raises the base damage. You can kind of just bring her in blitz content with MHX Alter. If you think you can clear the quest in 3 turns or less, one of the better servants that you can bring. And again, I was complaining about this on stream. I don't know why they don't start just making 4, 5, 6 break bar enemies more consistently for bosses, because I would love to start seeing more of that so we can kind of get away from even 3 turning bosses and stuff along those lines. You know, like imagine if like the ORT fight, you had to clear all 10 break bars at once instead of having to do 1 at a time. Stuff like that I think would be really, really sick. But until they want to start doing more stuff like that, MHX Alter is going to be insane. You know, people like her, Tyra, can be really, really good for just blitzing through challenge quests. Hijikata. Okay, Hijikata I don't think is as bad as people make him out to be. I actually think you can get some decent mileage out of him because unlike, say, Anne and Mary, sorry, I always get the first and last names mixed up. Aside from them, Hijikata also has a lot of other stuff at his disposal, despite, you know, having the, oh, if I'm at low HP, I'll do really big damage. You know, he has himself the guts. He does support the party. He can cleanse his debuffs. He also has crit that further capitalizes on his low HP, right? So he can actually be a decent enough servant. You could probably slap Necromancy on him and maybe get some mileage. I don't know if anybody's done that, but if they have, that probably would be really funny if you could get some procs up on it. I think that'd be hilarious. But I do think Hijikata is better in testing than most people give him credit for. Because I know people are going to be like, well, why is he way better than Ibaraki? Because he has like the same skill set plus more. Like, he has crit damage. He supports. He's just doing a bit more, plus having a niche as opposed to not having a niche at all and being low HP is better, right? It's just going to be better to have more than have less. Moving into Cha-Cha, I think Cha-Cha is definitely definitely kind of past her time. She was really good when she came out for year 2 because that kind of scaling battery would mean like, oh, you slap a 50% battery on her, you get 20% every single turn, and by wave 3, you know, you're able to fire NP. It was a little wonky because you also wanted to stack the defense down on, what is it, her second or third skill? You wanted to stack that and get as much of that as possible, but it would still generally be fine, you know, for most clears, you know, especially for free-to-plays. An NP5 AoE Berserker that could be your guaranteed wave 3 clear. Very, very useful. It's just, as of right now, not really favored, you know, in the current meta and everything, but if you wanted to still bring her as a free to play, you know, you wanted to bring her because you don't have like the more meta supports and you need to kind of do just raw farming, as it were, then you could probably still get some value out of Cha-Cha, I would imagine, but not super great. I even think maybe putting her in C might be a little bit too nice, but you know, we'll see. Penthesilea I do think has quite a decent niche. I don't know if I want to put her in B because it's a super focused niche against Greek mythological males. But even outside of that, I guess her kit is decent. You know, she's got decent sustain with the NP and the HP. And then she does have like the solid damage buff. I think I'm going to keep her in C+, though. I think having a super cornered niche that doesn't come up all that often does hold her back a little bit, but I can't put her in C tier because when that niche does come up, you see an Achilles, you see a Hector, whoever, they get trounced, right? Like, I think it's one of the rare 200% just flat power mods where they just full give you the power, like the Tyra Genji one, right? It's so good when you're able to get it. Bunyan. Bunyan's a fun little gimmicky unit if you want to bring her. I mean, she had like the quickest NP in the game for a little bit. I mean, she does like decent supports for a free-to-play, I suppose. Like, you know, she heals, she lowers defense, she gives the party the Buster buff, but realistically, you're probably not bringing Bunyan, and you probably have better options. But, I mean, she's fun to play around with. You know, if you need a low-cost servant to kind of just throw in a team that maybe your Merlin goes down and, you know, Bunyan comes in, gives you a little bit of extra damage, lowers their defense, gives you a little bit of a heal, maybe does some chip damage herself, you know, she could be decent enough for that. Summer Nobu. Summer Nobu, I think, is also a bit better than people are giving her credit for. That might just be because I use Summer Nobu a lot more than other people. Like, I would love to put her in B tier as like a solid unit because having a Divinity power mod is not bad, but her kit is a little bit wonky. I mean, she has the Skahawk thing where you can refund more NP on her Buster cards, right? Like, she has a very wonky kit, which also might make it hard for newer players to use because the game teaches you, use your arts cards to refund your NP, and then you get someone like Summer Nobu and Skahawk who refund more on their Buster cards. It kind of goes against everything they teach you, so... but is that really... Yeah, that might be a fault. That might be a fault that is like really hard to understand and intuit if you're a newer player and you get your hands on them and you just don't know, because nobody also talks about it anymore either, right? Anybody that talks about Skahawk barely mentions that outside of me, because I want to make sure people know what they're getting into and aren't like, whoa, why am I getting no NP back on these cards? But she still does have, I guess, decent survivability. She can do okay crits. They did give her the Burning Battlefield thing, but... you know, they did give her the buff. They buffed her. Yeah, you know, because of the Burning Battlefield thing, I think that does justify maybe like a B tier placement. And I'm really high on the Divinity power mod thing. I think the Divinity power mod is super useful. I remember the first time I started using Summer Nobu was for the Gugalana boss fight in Summer 2, and I was like, ooh, Summer Nobu's actually pretty decent. And then every now and then a Divinity boss will come out, I'll just chuck Nobu at it, and we'll just obliterate them. She'll just beat them up. You know, some of the NP, do the JoJo meme, and then call it a day. Okay, as opposed, I think this is definitely going to get people upset because Summer Nobu is higher than like Atalanta Altar. And I know people really like Atalanta Altar, but I think her kit is just so wonky, man. Like, I think it's so easy to fix her up and make her a lot better, but she's just got a goofy kit. I mean, even... sometimes I'll bring her out to things and I'll be like, okay, she'll be able to chuck this guy for a lot of damage, and it just feels like she's not doing any damage. Like, especially with the NP as well, even with the quick mana burst up. And then they gave her the buff to give her Buster crit instead of the quick buff, which is, yeah, it's technically going to be better by the end of 2024 when we revisit this list because we'll have Summer Scotty, but still, it just seems strange. Just give her general crit damage. Just let her be a crit servant. Was giving her generic crit damage on her first skill going to make her too broken? I don't think so. I mean, she's got the basics of being a decent servant. I mean, you know, she has a solid card buff. She has survivability. She can crit pretty decently. But it's just the NP doesn't feel like it does a whole lot of damage. The NP seal on the NP is nice, but I wish they would just chuck her, I don't know, like an NP buff with like a power mod or something along those lines. I think definitely could help her out. It just disappoints me because Atalanta Alter is on my Grail list. Like, she's one of the servants that I really do want to go forward in Grail. I just wish they would make her a little bit better. It's kind of like how I feel about Tomoe, where I finally grailed Tomoe like 1 or 2 years ago, and I still try to bring her, but I'm like, man, can you chuck the servants I like a buff, please? Summer Jolter. Okay, Summer Jolter is going to probably snag into that like B tier position, like probably that high B tier position, just because I think if you're a free-to-play guy, she's the best single target unit you should probably be using, right? Because, you know, maybe you don't have Kentucky, maybe you don't have Vlad, you don't have MHX Alter, you don't have Galatea, who we'll get to in a little bit, you don't have Ku Alter, you don't have any of these other guys. Berserker Jolter will just treat you right. I mean, I know it's 1 regenerating dodge at the beginning of every turn, but you're more than likely not going to get attacked more than twice in a turn. And I know she's a Berserker, but she can take the occasional hit, especially if you're pairing her with people like, say, Waver to give her defense or Merlin to give her more heals. You know, she can take that occasional hit, and then sometimes, you know, you're only attacked once per turn, and it does its job. It also gives her NP gain, so she just fluidly will find her NP again. The attack buff actually starts giving her so much burn that it actually starts to become a bit significant. And now that we have Honey Lake in the game, you can actually put that burn niche to use, which I really like. The battery also helps her, you know, flow really well and being able to do good, consistent NPs. I do want them to buff the 3rd skill, not to increase the battery, but just to fix the Buster buff over there. Because I think, if I'm remembering correctly, it's like 20% for 1 turn, but I guess I understand. They made a single target Buster free-to-play servant that they didn't want to be too good, you know, outshining other units, so they nerfed the battery to 20, and then they did like the 20% Buster damage over there. But she's definitely a very, very solid unit. I mean, is she the craziest? Does she have all these insane bells and whistles? Not really, but you can kind of just bring her wherever you want, and she'll perform rather well. Zhang I think deserves a bit more credit than he's also given. You'll notice that like the bell curve for Berserkers, I just think most of them are rather decent, right? Because Zhang can crit really well, has survivability, has decent enough card buffs, can refund decently on his NP, right? And also drop a decent amount of stars, which then he can use for like 100% crit damage and everything. I think he's massively overlooked. I think people just are like, oh, Zhang Yu looks weird, I'm not going to use that servant. But one, you have not read the Zhang Yu lore. This guy is an absolute monster, bro. Like, Lu Bu is like, you know, China's like super warrior man, but I think it should be Zhang Yu. Like, Zhang Yu is insane. I know it's hard to find lore on this dude, but he is like, they sent this man down from heaven to be a warrior. Like, this guy is insane. He's out of his mind. So 1, I think he deserves more respect. 2, I know he looks like a weird horseman, but come on, just try him out. Just bring him a few times. I promise you, he's better than you think, right? He has survivability. He will probably crit the enemy into oblivion. And again, being able to loop decently on his NP while also dropping stars on a decent quick AoE NP, I think is worth being like just a decent enough servant, right? Arjuna, okay, do I even have to talk about Arjuna Alter? I mean, like, this is just like the big McChungus damage dealer in the game. It's like the most free damage you'll ever see. The only time that you don't really get big damage on Arjuna Alter is when you miss out on the debuff on his NP, because the NP not only counts as a debuff for his first skill, but it also is a buster down, so his NP does more damage. That is the only time where it feels like a little bit of a shaft using Arjuna Alter, but it only really comes up if, say, the end like of a free quest or something has some really high like goddess entity core servant that has like 55% debuff resistance, right? Like, that's the only time that stuff is ever coming up. Realistically, you're gonna get that most of the time. And worst case scenario, you can use the stun plug suit instead, which is like a 500% chance to stun. So even if you don't get the buster down, you still have a debuff on the enemy, right? So that's crazy. 30% battery lets him farm. And then the guts plus the heal does allow him to survive long enough in challenge quests to nuke the enemy, right? Because this guy is starting to get to the point of like single target damage on an AoE server. Like he does really, really good damage. So I don't know if I have to elaborate anymore. Arjuna Altar is insanely good. Mori is a fun unit to use. I'll give him that. I don't know if I could particularly say that he's better than Ibaraki, because Ibaraki is a bit more of a consistent unit. Mori's a bit strange because Mori likes to attack and stack a bunch of buffs and get attacked and stack a bunch of buffs. The problem is he's a Berserker, and Berserkers kind of explode whenever a slight gust of wind comes their way, so Mori's definitely really interesting. You can do a lot of damage with him. And granted, when they made him, they did give him an on-death buff because they were like, okay, we know he's probably going to explode. So at least when he dies, you get some stars. You at least get something out of it, which almost makes it like, it just imagines to me like he's like one of those Lego characters exploding and they explode into money. He just explodes into stars, right? I think that's really, really funny on some level, but I don't know if I can say that he's particularly better than anybody else over here. He's definitely very gimmicky for sure, but he's fun, right? He has decent synergy with Chen Gong if you're a free-to-play, right? Because Chen Gong buffs specifically Buster Berserker. Well, I mean, not specifically Buster Berserkers, but you want them to be Buster Berserkers because you want the Buster buff, and the crit buff is for the Berserkers only. Salome, I think, is also kind of in that category as well, where you know, I think people were like, they see the 100% battery and their eyes just explode. You know, they're just like, oh my goodness, that's crazy. But you got to wait like 7 turns to get it. If you want to put it in to like a stall strategy, I guess it's kind of worth going for. But aside from that, I really don't see a purpose in using Salome. But I mean, in theory, she's a fun gimmick servant to use, right? Like in theory, I mean, she can do decent damage, I suppose. Is like an NP5 free-to-play friend point units, but I don't know if I could really do more than C tier, Chief. Berserker Masashi. Berserker Masashi, I think, is crazy. I'm actually going to even make her into A+ tier, and you guys can suck my nards on this one, because not only, and this is without the JP buff, hear me out, not only is she still good enough for farming, right? I know people are going to be like, but she can't 90++ for it's like, okay, but she can still do everything else in the game. Like any other node, it's like 85% of the content she can do, right? Gonna be absolutely fine and all that. She just can't do like a couple of nodes, right? That's whatever, that's fine. Who cares, right? She's also insanely good in the challenge quest. She is so good, and I'm tired of people pretending like she's not. I mean, even when Ibuki came out, people were like, oh, she's also stealing Berserker Masashi's thing. And I'm like, I think they're both kind of on par when it comes to challenge quests, because Ibuki removes buffs, but not every buff can be removed. I mean, there's an Odysseus boss fight that just came out on JP who has like unremovable invul and all this good stuff, right? Masashi can at least get around that, right? She has the Pierce Invincibility Wombo combo that just allows her to destroy these challenge quests quick, fast, and in a hurry. She is refunding all over the place. She does really decent damage. And again, getting around everything, having the 1 dodge plus the guts over there is very, very nice, because they acknowledge that she's a Berserker. And for the same reason that, you know, Jalter might be fine with 1 hit, Masashi's got that plus a guts, right? Plus she's an arts unit, which means she also gets the invincibility from Castoria, plus the solemn defense from Castoria, plus Proto Merlin will come out. You know, this is not a plus for her being an A+ right now, but in the future, Proto Merlin will come out, and she has an AoE invincibility skill as well. So like, she will just continue to like kind of have good supports that are around her. Berserker Masashi is still a very, very good unit, and she's gonna probably be EX tier when she gets her buff, right? When that gets to NP or NP NA, she's gonna be insane, all right? She's ridiculous. Like, I'm tired of it. I'm tired of people capping on Masashi. Okay, then we bring it back down. Dino Mommy. Dino Mommy, I think, is an interesting enough servant. I don't know if I want to put her exactly down with some of these other single targets, because she's at least got stuff like the overcharge niche, right? Like she can at least do those overcharge things, which I think is kind of cool. She can also donate that to other people, like to some of your supports, if you want to try to get, like, let's say you have to bring Castoria, because Castoria is so good. You just bring her to any team comp. It doesn't matter if you're quick, arts, buster. You can bring her to anything. You want that extra solemn defense? By all means, donate it over to her, and she still gets her buffs, right? Which is very, very nice. The defense makes her decently tanky, although she's a berserker, so that's kind of fighting against the wind on that one. But I think she's kind of like a more modern take on, say, someone like an Ibaraki, right? Like where they're just like a really decent like challenge quest type berserker, right? Like I just really like what they did with her. You don't see her very much, but I think she's solid. Brynhildr, I kind of think in the same way. Unfortunately, her damage is a bit low, but they did give her a lot of the bare necessities, right? Like they gave her stuff like not only her own Buster and Arts buff, but she's also able to give that to Brynhildr's Beloved as well. She can pierce Invul, which I think is also really nice. It's just, one, they made her AoE, so her having more of a CQ-oriented, like, kit, especially with, like, the sustain buffs that she has, giving her stuff like that and then making her AoE, you kind of have to go off the deep end for those guys to be really crazy, right? They either need to be like this or this if they're going to be AoEs, and being, like, insane in challenge quests. They just didn't do it. I stand by that. I think if Summer Brynhildr was like a single target, she might see much more use. Like she probably would have ended up in something like B tier, if I'm being honest. It's just kind of unfortunate, but they could still save her with a buff or something, Galatea. Galatea and Vlad, they're kind of just two sides of the same coin to me. Like, Galatea is a little bit more tanky, has a little bit more party support. Vlad is a little bit better at doing damage. I mean, they gave her the buff where it's like, oh, now her buster cards that, kind of were weighing down her ability to refund, those now gen NP for her. She's debuff cleansing, she's, healing. She has double, like, big defense, which is pretty interesting because a lot of bosses will give themselves, like, sure hit or like Pierce Invul. They don't really give themselves Pierce defense anymore because that strategy was more of like a year 1 to 2 thing. If you guys remember like the mash bed of your waiver setups, those things where you try to get to 100% defense and then just face tank everything. A lot of those strategies have really died out. And so Galatea having that is really good. It's a very good form of survivability for her. Her damage isn't the craziest, but again, she also has the arts thing where on an arts NP, she's able to reduce the enemy's charge, because I think as an arts unit, being able to spam your NP, being able to kind of suppress the gauge of your opponent so they effectively never fire their NP is always going to be good. But Vlad, Galatea, I think whichever one you think is better, it's whatever. I think they're both just very, very strong units at the end of the day. Okay, I know a lot of people know that I'm very biased for Morgan, but Morgan is really good. Like, Morgan is very insane. She's a very good unit. I know people will say, well, that's because you have her at NP5. My brother in Christ, I've had her at NP1 on JP since she came out. I have not gotten a second copy of Morgan on JP, and I like having the dichotomy of using her on NA at NP5, so I get to see like full power Morgan, and then at JP, so I get a more normal view of Morgan, and they both feel really, really good. The only time Morgan doesn't feel super great on JP, and keep in mind, I don't even have Koyansky or Oberon over there, and I still think she's this good, is when she's fighting somebody without power mods, which you might say, aha, see, she's really bad there. Keep in mind, she's got, one, the man attribute power mod, which is insane, right? I think this last year has pretty much showed us that Earth and Man are going to be the main things that good units are going to start to get. That is the thing they're going to start to push over on the JP version of the game. That's the content that we're eventually going to get on NA, right? They're going to start pushing these so they can sell these new units that are like really strong into Earth and Man, because they're very broad categories. There's a lot of servants and a lot of random enemies on them. They're just really good categories that power mod against. But even if she doesn't have that, she at least does also have Fae and Knight of the Round Table. So her damage, even at NP1, I've found can still be good enough to get through waves 1 and 2 and most normalish nodes. And then she's able to take out at least like, say, a Gawain or say like a Melusine that's at the end of a free quest, something along those lines. And so she's still very good for that. And that's all just kind of talking about farming, not even talking about one of the major selling points for Morgan is that she's just immortal. She enables immortal team comps, which just effectively allow you to trivialize most bosses, right? You just bring your Merlin, your Castoria, and then your Morgan, and you're set. You're just never dying, right? You're never going to die, and you're going to be chilling. Even if you got NP1, I mean, that's what I brought against Demeter. It's fine, because even at NP1, you still crit really hard on the third skill. So I think Morgan's absolutely great. I mean, when she came out, I read her details, and I was like, this unit is broken, and I don't think I was proven wrong. You know, I think Morgan is still as good as she was when she released, you know, if not feeling better now that I'm starting to use her on NA and I can actually use her in farming setups. I mean, if you watch the streams, which every Monday, Wednesday, yeah, Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do FGO. I always use her on my farming comps on NA. Like, I'm always trying to use Morgan. Even if I don't want, like, if I can't do a 6 CE setup, I'll just throw K-Scope on Morgan, right? And I'll just do the Atlas Academy loop because I'm trying to level that one up. And I always bring Morgan. You know, we love our Morgans, all right? We really love the Morgussie, so we got to bring her out. But that's enough simping. Let's talk about Sei. Sei, I think, is very solid, but I think I had too much of a high view on her when she came out on JP. Like, when she came out on JP, I kind of had her around here. On more extensive use, now that she's come out on NA, I kind of think of her closer to C+. It just feels like, you know, her and Summer Canis, when they dropped on that second banner, just felt like they were missing something. I don't know, because they still gave her the triple power mods, which I really do like. And maybe that does still warrant her being in B tier. Because maybe that is still really, really solid, but it doesn't feel as good. There's just something in her kit that I'm just not seeing, right? There's something lacking in there. I can't put my foot down on it. You ever like look at a servant, you just can't decide what it is? Because she should feel really good. She should feel like a really strong B tier unit. I mean, because Nobu's up here and she only has Divinity, right? And I'm like, oh yeah, I love using Nobu. I think she's a very solid, just generic, average, good Berserker. But Sei should also feel like that, and I don't know what it is. I'm not sure, because she has all the basics. Like, she's got card buffs. She can crit. She, again, triple power mods. She's got good stuff. I just don't know what it is. I don't know. Someone in the comments who maybe is like the biggest Sei fanboy ever can maybe let me know what that is, because I don't think I can lower her from B tier, because again, triple power mods is really good, and having the basics is nice, but man, I don't know. There's just something. She soured on me. She soured on me a little bit more, but I'll again leave this in the description. I'll also pin this in the top comment if you want to make your own tier list, as I will be updating these every single year. Leave your thoughts in the comments down below, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Peace, late guys.